Welcome to Satsang.
Hello, Vishrant. Can you please talk about the topic, what is true rebellion?
A lot of people feel that rebellion is something that you do against something that's happening outside of you because you want to moving to change outside of you. But the true rebellion has nothing to do with what's happening outside of you. It has everything to do with how you've been programmed as a human being. Because none of us were programmed for freedom. None of us were programmed for happiness. You'd think we would be, but we're not. In fact, our default patterning of the ego is to constantly desire things to be different than how they are. And this is not happiness, this is dissatisfaction. We have been fed so many belief systems that are limiting and quite often not even real, that we take on board, and as a result, when those belief systems' expectations aren't met, we go into contraction and take ourselves into lower consciousness. And so the true rebellion is not against what's happening outside of you. It's what's happening in your own mind. It's about examining the mind, developing an observer of the mind so you can see what the mind is up to. And approaching every belief system that you have inside yourself with doubt. Because then, if there is doubt in a belief system, we'll start to have a look at it. We'll start to examine it. We'll start to see, is this real or is it not real? So the seeker moves into rebellion, but not outwardly, inwardly, against the programming, or another way of putting it, the brainwashing that has been done in their own heads. After all, when you really examine your mind, you discover that you didn't program you. Genetics did, causality did, your parents, your schooling, your religion, your government, your peers, but you didn't program you. And in that programming process, you were fed a lot of belief systems that may or may not be true. For the seeker, they need to be examined, because anything that brings about contraction in you as a result of an expectation not being met takes you into lower consciousness and takes you into sufferance. And so undoing the mind is essential. And it really occurs as a result of observing the mind first. That is where the rebellion begins. Watching the mind, just watching the mind. See what it does, see what it's up to. And then starting to take the different belief systems that aren't true apart. And it's easy. All we've got to do is put doubt into any belief system and it starts losing its power. And it's going to be up to you. No one can do this for you. Someone might be able to help you by pointing out a few things for you, pointing out a few belief systems that you could examine, but really the work or the rebellion is in your court. You're the one that has to rebel. And so all seekers are rebels. When we start looking, when we start observing our mind, the true rebellion has begun. Are there any questions? Any statements? or any challenges to this teaching today?
The first question is as follows. What would you say is the hardest thing about true rebellion?
Developing as an observer of the mind. We tend to take everything that we think for granted and we believe it. And developing an observer that simply watches the mind without judgment, without prejudice, without analysing, is the beginning. And that's very difficult to get going because it's not really the pattern that most people have. They have a pattern of believing the mind and going along with the dream. And so it always begins in observing, but that is not as easy done as said, because we're so used to interfering, getting involved in the dream, analysing. Meditation assists in developing a silent witness that simply watches the mind. And that's going to be up to you, because nobody can do that for you. Someone can't put a silent witness in you. You have to develop that role. Just watching the mind. Just seeing what it's up to. You'll be surprised at how many belief systems you have that you've never checked out. And you'll then get very surprised when you find that a lot of those belief systems don't hold water.
Do you see any value in external rebellions, like political revolutions or protests against climate change or police brutality, for example?
Look, I don't have a problem at all with people trying to change their outside circumstance through protest or whatever else they need to do to make it work better for them or better for other people or better for animals. Whatever works is fine. But my real interest is in helping people raise their consciousness levels, because truly, if we are to save this planet, what is required is higher consciousness, not lower consciousness. We don't gain higher consciousness by not examining our minds. We gain it by examining our minds, by watching our minds, by seeing how it all works, by challenging the belief systems that we have inside. Higher consciousness is the way. I have nothing against people trying to change their environment or change things with regards to unfair practices or whatever else is happening. But if you really want to change the world, change your mind. The true revolution begins inside of you.
The next question is as follows. Osho defined himself as an anarchist. Are you an anarchist, and do you think all awake people are anarchists?
I'm definitely an anarchist. I don't know about other awake people. I don't talk to them. So I don't know what they're up to. That's their business. I love freedom. I love truth. I love love. The anarchy really begins against your own mind. Take away all those limiting belief systems. Get free. That's best. Only you can do that. I think the most limiting belief system we can have is that I am a human being, or I am a body, or I am a mind. Such a limiting belief system, because we are beingness. And in beingness that we are, which is everything, appears a body and a mind. that claims to be you, but is not. Find that to be true. That's brilliant. Find your own true nature and stay aware of that. Awareness aware of itself. Then you can't possibly be a body or a mind. Now we're talking true freedom. The revolution has worked.
How do I start to remove the limiting beliefs?
It does really begin with watching the mind. I recall starting looking at belief systems when I was a teenager. The first belief system I looked at was the belief that I can be a victim. Because most people believe they can be a victim. And I got to see that victims actually have to volunteer to be victims. Bad things can happen or negative things can occur, but we can just see that as is and be okay with it, or we can turn ourselves into a victim of it and believe we are a victim. And in believing we are a victim, we start hurting ourselves. We start contracting. We start creating wounding for ourselves. And it's a belief system. Because we don't have to be a victim. We can just be as we are, and this is what is. Neither good nor bad, it's just simply what is. It's what's happening. Or we can turn ourselves into victims. So I started removing that particular belief system when I was 19, victim-orientated thinking. What a brilliant thing to do, really, because that's where we create most of our suffering. It's also where we create most of our wounding, in being a victim of life, people, conditions, ourselves. But it is a voluntary act. We don't have to ever be a victim. We can just see this is what life is. And so that was the first belief system that I removed. And it took a while. It took quite a few years to remove the belief system because it had been hardwired into me that I could be a victim through my parents, my schooling, my religion, my government, my peers. But I didn't buy it because I saw the truth. We cannot actually be victims unless we volunteer to be a victim. So there was a great deal of freedom just in removing that belief system. Hell of a lot less suffering. No wound production. When you really look at it, it's probably one of the terriblest beliefs we can have. The belief that we can be a victim, rather than this is just what is. Not a bad place to start, but it's up to you. You create your reality. What are your beliefs, and how are they affecting you? But it begins by having a look, observing. What's the mind up to? Developing that silent witness that simply watches the mind so it can see the mind clearly without judgment.
The following question has been asked by a viewer. Is watching the breath actually witnessing, or awareness being aware of itself? Are they one and the same?
From my perspective, I've always seen observing the mind as a role of the mind. There is always that is aware, pure awareness there that is aware. But for a person to have awareness aware of itself, they have to be awake. I developed the silent witness when I was quite young, watching the mind without judgment, recognizing that the moment I went in judgment or analyzing, I was now lost in the mind again. I was in another dream. And so I developed this witness or observer that simply watched the mind like I'd be watching someone else's mind, without judgment, without prejudice, without analysing. And because I was simply watching, I got to see the mechanics or the nuts and bolts of how the mind worked. Awareness, aware of itself, is enlightenment. That's not a bad thing to go for. But unless the mind is programmed to support enlightenment, it won't. And I haven't met anyone yet who has had a mind that is programmed to support enlightenment. That would be an equanimous mind, a mind that stays even no matter what is happening, a mind that is not reactive, responsive maybe, but not reactive. And that takes a fair bit of doing. And that is the work of the seeker, to develop a mind that stays even, that's not up and down all over the place, running around like a monkey, but stays even. That sort of mind will support enlightenment, and that sort of mind has been achieved as a result of higher consciousness.
So, does one have to rebel against part of themselves to gain higher consciousness?
Does one have to rebel? How about rebel?
Sorry, that's right, rebel.
Does one have to rebel against parts of themselves to gain higher consciousness? Well, first of all, against yourself. First of all, you're not the mind, so you're not rebelling against yourself. The rebellion is against a whole pile of belief systems that were put into the mind, programmed into the mind. That's the rebellion. It's not against yourself. You always remain, as far as the psyche is concerned, you always remain your own best friend. Always. But have a look at how it's been programmed. And you didn't program you, so it's not your fault. But have a look at how you've been programmed. And are those programs real? Are they true? Are the belief systems fundamentally sound or not? I haven't found any belief systems that I like yet. I don't know best, because that's closer to the truth for all of us.
Next question is as follows. Is it important to stop my mind and the continual thoughts? How do I do this?
That's a very difficult thing to do. And I'm not suggesting that you actually do that. I'm suggesting that you watch the mind. Just observe it. See what it's doing. And then in that observation, there's things that you just won't want to run anymore, because you can see clearly that they're detrimental. You can see clearly that they're false. The moment we start seeing problems inside our belief systems, doubting our belief systems lose their power. And so the observing itself is a wonderful tool for change towards higher consciousness. Developing that silent witness that simply observes the mind. It's brilliant. But it does need to be developed. If we're thinking about things, we're in dream. If we're analysing things, we're in dream. If we're judging things, we're in dream. So the silent witness doesn't do that. It just watches. It just witnesses. Start the rebellion.
Why is it so hard for me to change my habit of daydreaming, even when I have been practicing meditation?
Because you haven't practiced enough. You see, we all have default patterns that are there because we've repeated the same thing over and over again long enough Psychiatrists reckon around about 2 years a child develops a default pattern. A default pattern is just a pattern that happens without us thinking about it. It happens unconsciously to a large degree. Whereas we can change something by discipline in the moment by using willpower, but a default pattern happens automatically. And so to change these automatic patterns, like daydreaming is an automatic pattern, probably an escape methodology used for some reason when you're a kid, and it's followed you into adult years. It's a way of getting away from something when we daydream, and that's a pattern. Meditation is the pattern. To break that is a process of breaking that pattern. Meditation means putting awareness on what is real. Daydreaming is not real, it's dreaming. And so we can break the pattern of daydreaming by practicing being with what is real. Anything is real except what you think. So meditation is being aware of what is real. Daydreaming, well, you're wasting your life. You're living in a third grade movie inside your head that's not real. And you're not living really, you're existing in a dream. You're not living in reality, you're wasting your life. And so meditation is the great saviour. It recovers us from the dream that we're lost in if we allow ourselves to meditate. But we have to put that in practice. And if we practice being present long enough to reality, that becomes our habit. That becomes our default pattern. So a practiced meditator is likely to be living in reality because that's their practice. They don't need discipline to do it. It's a default pattern now of being present to reality instead of present to dream. But that can only be achieved through repetition, the practice of being present to what is real, which in a way is the denial of the dream, the denial of the daydreaming. And it works, but you have to practice it. It's a little bit like playing tennis. You can watch as many games as you like on television, and you're not going to be that good at tennis. But if you go out every day and you practice for an hour with somebody or against a wall, you're going to get good at it because of the practice. After a while, the strokes and the plays will become default in you. The same goes for being present to reality instead of daydreaming. Whatever you practice, you will get good at. It's up to you. What do you practice?
Sometimes I find my mind is agitated. When you say to watch your mind, what watches the agitated mind?
Just another role of the mind, really. It's a role that you've developed that just watches. So the mind's agitated and there's something that's watching it. You could say it's aware of it because it's watching it. And so instead of being caught in the totality of the agitation and that story, there's also a role of the mind that is witnessing it, watching it. So there's a certain level of separation. And because of that separation, there isn't the intensity in the agitation either. Developing the silent witness is brilliant in that way because it takes us away from the intensity of distress or turmoil that is caused inside the mind when it's dreaming nasty dreams. You're at a point where you can see that actually it's just a dream. It's not real because nothing you think is real. It's all imagined. But when we're caught in the dream, we think it's real. When we're lost in the dream, we think it's real. But when you have that silent witness, there's a part of you that knows it's not real. There's freedom in that.
How to just witness the mind and not get lost in judgments of the mind?
Yeah, I can only do that through practice, really. There's no other way. We are probably programmed to get caught in our minds. We're programmed to analyze. We're programmed to do that. So that's what we do. To actually develop a silent witness that doesn't get caught, doesn't go into dream, because analyzing is dream, takes practice. There's no easy way. I can't explain it to you so you logically get it and that's that. That's not how this works. It only works because you practice. You practiced dreaming for a long time to be constantly dreaming. You practiced analysing for a long time to be constantly analysing. And that's what we did at school. We went to school and we learned how to problem solve so we could actually get a mark, so we could get a diploma or a degree. Unfortunately, because that's become a default pattern of problem solving, most human adults live as problem solving. In their heads, constantly looking for problems to solve and then solving them. From my perspective, that's a form of suffering. How about just being here without that? Very nice. Just here, without that noise, without that problem solving, without that analysing, just here. That takes practice. You took a lot of practice to live in your head. Now it's going to take a fair bit of practice to not live in your head.
The next question is as follows. I find I get very concentrated at work. What are some practices for getting out of my mind or even just staying relaxed in the workplace?
Yeah, okay. So sometimes I talk about ambient awareness as opposed or different than focused awareness. So we can concentrate on what we're doing, and that takes a fair bit of energy, a fair bit of intensity to do so. Or we can go ambient and take a lot of things in, and that's a very relaxed space as opposed to focused awareness. But to be ambient aware takes practice. Once again, come back to that word, practice. And so instead of just being aware of what's happening here, can we allow our awareness to roam out further and be aware of everything that's happening around us? And to do that, we have to be relaxed to some degree. We can't be focused to have ambient awareness. Ambient awareness is very beautiful. It's quite relaxed, but for a lot of people it would take practice because they're so used to having focused awareness, concentration. But concentration, focused awareness is exhausting. Ambient awareness is not because it's relaxed. But once again, it requires practice because you've practiced at focused awareness, so you're probably reasonably good at that. Now, how good can you be at ambient awareness? When you were a little kid, you had a certain level of ambient awareness because you weren't practiced at focused awareness yet. In a way, it's like going back to childhood. It's like going back to wonderment. The world is so big and large and beautiful. But when we're focused, we miss most of it. Go ambient. It's very, very nice.
Do you recommend active meditation practices like walking, Tai Chi, and yoga?
Heck yeah. I recommend meditation every moment, or mindfulness every moment, mindful of what is real every moment, not just in the practice of yoga, Tai Chi, or walking. How about with everything you do? How about being present to every movement? How about being present to life? How about living in life instead of living in your head? Because when we're present to everything, when we're in meditation to everything, in mindfulness to everything, we are truly living in reality. It's up to you. You're the one creating your reality by the way you think. I love Tai Chi. I love yoga. I love meditation. But really, how about just being mindful of everything that you do? Being present to everything that you do. How about that?
The next question is as follows. Is it true that enlightened people can't be controlled? And why is that?
It is true. I think it's one of the reasons that people who woke up and said that they were God got burned at the stake or murdered in some way in the past. Because you actually can't control someone who's awake. They're beyond control. They're beyond the mind. They're free. There's nothing you've got that they want. They're satisfied with nothing. They're profoundly content for no reason. Waking up to our true nature is the ultimate freedom. It truly is the revolution against the mind. Because you're living beyond the mind, living as existing, better way of putting it, as pure awareness, pure consciousness, that was never born, that cannot die, that cannot be touched by anything, that is our true nature, that is everybody's true nature, pure beingness, pure awareness, pure consciousness. You can't be controlled once you wake up. Freedom. And it begins with the revolution against your own mind.
I have led most of my life trying to be normal and fit in with society, but I've mostly struggled with that. Do I need to stop caring what people think of me in order to wake up?
Try to be normal. I'm not sure what normal is yet. If you want to wake up, all you've got to do is learn unconditional surrender. And it's the hardest thing in the world to learn from the perspective of the mind, because we are not in any way genetically programmed for it or causally programmed for it. We're programmed for survival, which means programmed to control constantly. Unconditional surrender is foreign to us, yet it is the doorway to super consciousness. Can you surrender? Can you accept life as it is, which is the way that we learn surrender, through the practice of acceptance and letting go? Or are you going to resist, which is normal? So all you need to learn, if you're interested in waking up, is unconditional surrender. But we get there through practice. So you look at what do you practice? Do you practice acceptance? Do you practice let go? Or do you practice resistance? Do you practice righteousness? Do you practice arrogance? What do you practice? Those who practice acceptance and let go eventually can surrender unconditionally. It doesn't happen because you think it's a good idea. It happens because of practice. What do you practice? People don't like that answer very much because it's very hard to do. It's very hard to surrender unconditionally. It's a death. And it's true, we have to die before we can know ourselves as truth, really. That's true too. And so unconditional surrender is the death. The Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree. He didn't sit under the Bodhi tree and meditate. He didn't sit under the Bodhi tree and self-inquire. He sat under the Bodhi tree and surrendered unconditionally, which is actually a non-doing, and awakening occurred. This is the way. Unconditional surrender is the way. And it is the mind that surrenders unconditionally. But that takes practice. But that's all you need to know. Nothing else.
What dies in unconditional surrender?
The dream that believes it's you. The I. And with the I, the survival mechanism, the primary survival mechanism of the body. And so after awakening, knowing self as truth, or awareness aware of itself, there is no fear. Fear is completely gone. It's in Sanskrit it's called abhaya, fearlessness. But that's because there's no fear anymore. It's gone. Because the primary survival mechanism has dropped. It's dropped with the I. And instead of experiencing yourself as an imagined somebody, there's just nobody here. There's an absence. You're just here, but there's nobody here. Pure beingness, but nobody here. And that's freedom. It's absolute freedom. So awakening is to our own true nature is just the best. But the thing that dies is the one that's looking for awakening, the I, the dream that believes it's had a past, that believes it has a future. But take away your imagination and it does not exist because it's not real. Who you truly are does. It's always here. Pure beingness.
The following question is from a Facebook viewer. How can you accept brutal rape unconditionally?
It may sound very callous of me to say that you can, but I got to tell you that you can. In my own personal experience in this life, as a man and as a teenager, I've had extremely nasty things occur in my life, and I have found that I can accept them. And the reason that I found that I can accept them is because to not accept them creates suffering in me, and I'm not willing to do that. No matter what has happened in this life stream, I accept. Because to turn myself in any way, shape or form into a victim would just be a continuance of what happened in the first place. Except this time, instead of a perpetrator hurting me, I'm hurting me. Because I'm the one buying the victim story. I'm the one that is hurting myself over and over again by seeing myself as a victim. And I'm just not prepared to do that. It's bad enough that things happen that are negative in the first place without you continuing it. It's up to you. If you can find acceptance for what is, if you can actually find a way not to be a victim, you can be free. If you cannot, you will remain a prisoner of it. And that is your doing, because you're creating it with your mind.
The next question. What will the practice of surrender look like when things are going wrong for me?
It won't look like anything because surrender doesn't have a look, it's a non-doing. So things go wrong and there's just no reaction. And so, for instance, if I was in physical pain, you wouldn't know because I wouldn't be reacting to it. Surrender is a non-doing. And this is what the ego doesn't get. It doesn't get non-doing. It says, how can I do surrender? The ego can't. It's an absence. It's an absence of reaction. It's an absence. And it can only be achieved through practice. The practice of acceptance, the practice of let go. How free do you want to be? As long as you hang on to anything, you are a prisoner of whatever you're hanging on to. And that's your doing, not someone else's doing. You are responsible. Negative things happen to us in this world, to every human being. We're the ones that can continue it or stop it, because we're in charge of our minds. Your choice.
Since I started on a spiritual path, I have become less disturbed by negative events and circumstances of my life. But my family now think that I don't care because I'm more detached. Can you please speak about the difference between being detached and not caring?
In my life, I'm very detached from everything. But I care deeply about human beings, about animals, and I spend my life in service to try to help people because I care. But I am very detached. And so being detached doesn't necessarily make you not care. When heart opens, when heart awakens, it affects the mind in such a way that it cares about everything and tries to take care of everything. This is the beauty of the heart. This is how it affects the mind. It is lovely. And so from this detached space, there is just a life of service in the benefit of others. And this is beautiful. This is the way of the heart. It's up to you. If you're willing to be open, you can find heart. If you're not willing to be open, it's going to be difficult because all of your defense systems, all of your closures are in the way of you perceiving love. It's up to you. Every time we close because we get angry at something, we cut ourselves off from our own heart and we bring more darkness and more violence into the world. If we stay open and we start perceiving love, we can become an oasis of that and we can bring more of that into the world. But we're responsible for how our mind is. Nobody else is doing it to us. We create our thoughts. We create the way we are in the world. We are 100% responsible. We can't blame others for how we are. Not in reality. Because we're responsible. You create your reality by the way you think.
I've heard it said that it is the nature of man for the heart to open and close like a flower. Is this true?
I really wouldn't know. Open and close like a flower. That's very poetic. And the nature of man. Look, if you stay open, the love is there and you perceive it. If you keep closing, of course you're going to cut yourself off from it. That's a given. But you're responsible for the closure, so you're responsible for the cutting off. If you remain open, heart and love is always here, because it's always here. It's only not here when you're closed or somehow defended. Find out for yourself. Practice openness. When you start practicing openness, you're going to discover how closed you are, how defended you are, and that gives you an opportunity to either take down those defenses and open up or remain closed. It's up to you. You create your reality. Nobody else does. Higher consciousness is achieved through openness, not through closure. It's achieved through being undefended, not defended. You won't find someone with higher consciousness who's closed. If they are, they've gone back down to lower consciousness. One thing everybody that I've ever met who's awake has in common is they're wide open, undefended, vulnerable. That's got to tell you something. There was a price that was paid for that. That doesn't happen by itself because it's against nature. Higher consciousness is against nature. So is enlightenment. Because in nature, we defend ourselves, we protect ourselves, we survive. Only human beings can go beyond that because they can learn to surrender. They can learn to accept. They can learn to let go. It's up to you. You're creating your reality. Nobody's creating it for you. It's up to you.
Sometimes people in group situations will draw others into their negativity. What can I do to stop myself from being drawn in by the negativity of others?
It's a choice, isn't it? You can listen to someone's negativity and not buy it, or you can buy it. Your choice. The question would indicate that you think you have no choice. Of course you have a choice. You don't have to buy people's negativity. You can stay detached from it. It's up to you. Why would you want to buy it anyway? It just takes you down the chute. It's already taken them down the chute. Why do you want to go with them? Yeah.
I see you as a rebel. Did you become a rebel because you wanted to change the world?
Heck no. I became a rebel because I didn't like school teachers. I didn't like bullies. I didn't like my parents. I didn't like the life I had as a child. I rebelled against it. I was what was considered an uncontrollable child. And so I did rebel. And I got into a lot of trouble because in my era, the consequences for rebellion was beatings. And I was beaten every day at school because I did not comply. I was a rebel back then. But it wasn't until I got to about 18 or 19 that I realized that the true rebellion is not outside of you. It's inside of you. It's how you've been brainwashed. It's how you've been programmed. You've been programmed to be a prisoner. The true rebellion is inside of you.
There's a saying by Gandhi, be the change that you want to see in the world. What is your opinion on this statement?
Yeah. Okay, so people get into this rebellion idea and they go out and they protest and they go out with anger. Well, what they're doing is taking more violence into the world. And violence doesn't fix things. It makes things worse. But people think that somehow their violent nature is somehow going to do some good. No, violence doesn't do good. Violence is bad. You want to change the world, change yourself, be the change as Gandhi has put. Become a loving, kind, generous person. Become someone who takes care of others, someone who picks up the rubbish that other people drop on the road, someone who can make a difference because they have changed inside of themselves. If all we do is go out there and shake our fist in anger, we're not moving to change. We're just bringing more violence into the world. We're bringing more darkness into the world. We're not lighting anything up. You really want to make a change inside yourself. You become the change. There's a thing in the Hindu religion called Ahimsa, which means non-violence. Ahimsa is a way of life, but it's not just non-violence outside of yourself. It's also non-violence inside of yourself. Anger is violence. Have a look and see. And when we project it at someone else, we're being violent towards them. And when we're just angry, we're being violent to ourselves. Have a look and see. Be the change inside of you. Be that change that you want to see in the world. You be the change. Gandhi got it right.
What is the most effective way to see the parts of my psyche that I'm unaware of?
Well, developing that silent witness is the only way, really. I don't know. Oh, no, there is another way. Yeah. Get involved with a group of people who are willing to tell you the truth about you. Not a group of people who just want to tell you how wonderful you are because they want your acceptance. But get involved with a group of people who are willing to tell you what they can see about you. And those people will help you see more about what's happening inside of you. And that is an effective way to have friends who are willing to tell you what's going on in you. From my perspective, I've always enjoyed the people who have been willing or have the courage to tell me what they can see about me, even if it's negative. Because sometimes in the past I wasn't able to see. So besides developing a silent witness that watches the mind, having a group of friends who are willing to tell you the truth about what they can see about you is brilliant, particularly if those friends have some acumen, particularly if they have higher consciousness themselves, because they're going to see things that are really valuable for you to see. Who you associate with is going to affect you a great deal. If all you do is hang out with people who tell you how lovely you are, well, you're not going to see much. How about hanging out with the ones who tell you how bad you are? They're probably going to be your better teachers.
The next question. Without being identified with, the I appears to be an entity comprised of body and conditioned mind. How to remove this identification?
From the perspective of the mind, it's not actually possible. The only way that the I identification can drop is if you know yourself as truth. When awareness is aware of itself, it is absolutely impossible for the mind to think that it is a somebody, because it is seen for what it is, a dream that is not real, that is based in projections and memories, neither being real. But that is because awareness would be aware of itself. And so the only true way to become identified, to drop the I, is to wake up to your true nature and stay awake. That's called enlightenment. That's the only possibility. The I trying to be disidentified from itself is just the I playing games with itself. Every now and again I've heard people trying to talk without using the word I. It sounds so ridiculous. You want to be disidentified, wake up.
The next question is as follows. I find that when I can tune into the energy of beingness, I lose touch with the world out here. How do you interact with others while still keeping your awareness on beingness?
That's an old question. It's in the early stages of awareness finding itself, it's very hard because you've got awareness on awareness and you haven't got much awareness out here. I remember one of my early teachers used to say that what can happen is you can have one foot in and one foot out. In other words, awareness on awareness and awareness also out in through the mind, the world. But that takes a bit of practice, because quite often when awareness goes out into the world, it leaves itself. So there's a sense of losing beingness, or losing that expanded reality that you found. And so from my perspective, that flip-flopping occurred for over 12 months, where I'd find myself as beingness, then I'd find myself as ego, then I'd find myself as beingness. And it was in the unconditional surrendering of the mind in an ongoing way that allowed awareness to start to really lock onto itself. And so it didn't shift. It got so locked on, it didn't shift. And then being in the world and negotiating the world became possible from having awareness on awareness. It didn't shift. But I'm not going to say that was that easy either. It's difficult. I used to practice in Satsang with my teachers, because when I was with my teachers, I'd find awareness would sit on itself. And then I'd practice talking to them, which meant awareness was also out as well as being in. So there was a practice of awareness there was a practice of having awareness out while awareness was locked onto itself in Satsang with my teachers. And that became continuous. About 21 years ago, it's like awareness, like two magnets came together and they locked on. Awareness locked onto itself. But there was a year of what I would call flip-flopping, which I believe John de Ruyter called half-baked enlightenment, where you can find beingness, but you lose it. You go back to the I. It's not full enlightenment, it's half-baked enlightenment. Practice is what works. Find someone who's awake and practice with them.
You mentioned that you rebelled initially because you didn't like your teachers and parents. How did you find your motivators and drivers in life and then change them?
I think we need to go a little deeper into the story of why the original rebellion began. And that was because I had ADD, and I was dyslexic, and it was undiagnosed. And so I couldn't get acceptance. And I was all over the place because my concentration was very limited. So everyone tried to bring me into line through discipline, rather than understanding that I actually had a couple of conditions that weren't that helpful. So instead of complying, I just rebelled. I went wild, really. It's like stopped looking for acceptance completely from outside of myself and did whatever I wanted to do. This is a true rebellion, but it's an uncomfortable rebellion. The true rebellion, the real rebellion, is really when you get inside your own mind and you get to have a look at how you've been programmed. And then you discover your motivators. And because I'd had a relatively hard time at school and a relatively hard time at home, one of my main motivators was anger. And it is such a destructive motivator because it has no heart in it and it's ruthless. But that was one of my motivators when I was very young. It was a motivator that I got to examine when I was 19 because I could see the damage it was doing. And I got to see the pattern of how anger worked, how I would actually get touched, something would hurt, and then anger would come out, which is blame. It's fueled by blame, and that took me away from the hurt and empowered me. And so I was avoiding my own pain, the touches, through anger. It was my defense system. But what a destructive thing to do, because it doesn't build bridges, it destroys them. And so I started to really watch the anger, and I'd watch the touch, and instead of going to anger, I'd allay it. In other words, my mind stopped supporting the reaction of anger. It stopped supporting the defense system of anger and instead allowed myself to feel what was touched instead of defending it. And that was a brilliant thing to do, because anger is just not good. It hurts people. It destroys relationships. It might empower you, but at what cost? And we don't need to be empowered in that way. We can be powerful without being angry. All we got to do is be willing to meet that touch, allow ourselves to feel that touch without reacting with blame. This is the way to higher consciousness. This is part of the true rebellion. Thank you for Satsang. Good to see you brave hearts here today.